Welcome, Village, to another episode of Jedi Learning with Baba Ken 2. And this is one of our very, very special editions of Breakfast with Baba. Yeah, you might look up and say it's 12 o'clock, but when I started, it was 11:59, which means technically it's still breakfast time. And yes, a good old biscuit never fails. And as a matter of fact, I have a little coffee to go with it. So I hope you go ahead and grab you something that you like to eat and sit back as we have this discussion that is extremely important right about now. Now, as you know, we just had the winter solstice. Happy Umoja, Merry Kwanzaa to everybody out there celebrating. It's all about unity today, being one, being united. And as a result of that, we want to talk about what Black families can demand of Miguel Cardona, the new Secretary of Education. We have to be united in how we approach political, especially educational issues. And we seem to be a monolithic group that sometimes votes just because a particular party tells us that's what we should do. But today, we are here to say, this is what we demand of our education. We already know that there are certain elements that we need to have in African-centered education that a national government may not support. But that does not mean that we do not have demands for those who will be participating in that particular education. So, Miguel Cardona, we understand that this is a Puerto Rican brother who understands the pain as his doctorate is in decreasing the levels of disparities in educational attainment between those of various backgrounds and the mainstream. So also bilingual education is something he has championed. So this man understands the pains that we all go through with regard to education being a quote unquote minority. He also understands lesser expectations of children in what he calls the pobrecito effect. And if you from East LA, you know the pobrecito is any little child that either fell and scraped their knees or is not doing too well that you say, oh, pobrecito, and you just pick them up and dust them off and send them on their way. And how he describes that is a lot of teachers may come on in, hey, how you doing, Rissarelli? A lot of teachers may come in and say, you know what? This child has a rough background. They can't put on the right pants. They're sagging. Their parents may not have a job. Matter of fact, the parents may not be together. And as a result of that, I am going to dictate how their education may be. Either I give them less problems, I don't hold them accountable for their homework, I give them extra recess, or I give them extra perks because I feel like they can't handle it because of everything that's going on at home. But that does not help that child to excel. They have to understand that no matter what my circumstance is, things are sometimes going to be hard and sometimes they're going to be easy. Not everybody's shot is the same. So by treating them special and pobrecito, you do not hold up high expectations for them and you let them fall right through the cracks. Basically scaffolding them to be a sucker. That's not something that you want to do. So, hey, what's going on, Aphrodisiac chair? So, what do we demand of Miguel Cardona? He understands these concepts, but what do we demand of him? Number one, school reopenings. Where do we stand on school reopenings? As far as he is concerned, he hopes that everybody goes back to school as soon as possible. As a matter of fact, the Biden administration has promised within the first 100 days, people will be back in school. How does this affect Black people? Well, we might have to say, we know before anybody goes back to school, they're going to request what? Vaccines. You know, we are very untrusting of the government and especially medical intervention. So for us, we want to know, what safety precautions are you going to put in place for those who do not want to take this particular vaccine? Are you going to extend the remote learning to us if we choose not to? Or are we just going to be denied an education, period? So Miguel Cardona, for schools to reopen, we are okay doing remote learning. If you ask many parents of African descent, they actually would defer going back to school at this point in time. Over 50% in recent polls have showed that parents of African descent are not ready to send their children back to school. So when school's reopening, we would want to wait until things kind of pan out. Let everybody else take the vaccine, turn into a zombie. Let us see how it affects before we say, hey, give us the mark of the beast. Next, standardized tests. They have to figure out what to do. Standardized tests are coming up, and are they going to give another waiver like Betsy DeVos did last year? Well, what did Miguel Cardona do? In the state of Connecticut, he applied for a waiver. So things are looking good so far. But he didn't apply for a waiver for 2021. So if he would have stayed the top executive out in Connecticut, they probably would have been testing this year. So we asked him, look at the track record on standardized testing in general, and extrapolating somebody's math and reading scores to say how they're going to do in life is not something that is very, very successful or equitable. So we say, scrap it. So number 2 on our list, scrap the standardized test scores. We know what it's going to say anyway. We can't read, we can't write. We're falling at the bottom percentiles. We don't need any more standardized test scores to tell us that. We just need to teach those skills and to learn those skills. That's the bottom line. Okay? And the funny thing to me is that the civil rights groups are the ones that are pushing for the standardized test scores. So him being beholden to civil rights group, being a Puerto Rican man, has to say something about it. But my question is, civil rights leaders, have you guys not looked at the data on standardized testing over the last 50 years? But that's a rhetorical question. Teachings of tomorrow. How are schools going to be reimagined? So we're on number 3 now. So we went through schools reopening. We went through standardized tests. Now we're going through reimagining schools. They're talking about schools going to be reimagined once you go back. And if you actually listen to Miguel Cardona's words, he says out of his own mouth, yes, we do need to push students to get back to school, but we also need healthy alternatives, digital alternatives for them. So if you think all of a sudden it's going to be vaccine or everybody going back to school, schools back in session as normal, that's not going to be the case. Over 50% of all students do not have access to full-time in-person learning. That's even in Connecticut, where he is the champion of going back to school. So we would say, what is school going to look like? Are we going to have more internships? Are we going to have more opportunities to do something different like coding? Are we going to have more opportunities to get skills that we can use in everyday life, like learning real estate and business development? How are things going to change in our schools? Are we going to have flexible scheduling? Do we still have to be up at 8 o'clock in the morning in order to do what we need to do? Or can I come in a little bit later? Okay, it's been shown to be more effective if I get to come in a little bit later. So we want to know exactly what that reimagined education and those teachings of tomorrow are going to look like. So, number 1, schools reopening. We want to hold off. Number 2, standardized tests. We want to hold off. Number 3, teachings of tomorrow. Please tell us you have some business development. Please tell us you have some flexible scheduling. Please tell us you have lesson discipline practices on students who do not attend every single day. Okay? This is what we want for our reimagined schools. Next up, school choice. We know that the last advocate or the last Secretary of Education was a big advocate of school choice. She went so far as to say religious schools could even apply for federal grants to get school choice as a private school almost. So what is this administration saying? Although we know he is a big proponent of public education and going back to school, he is also very, very friendly with the school choice people. A lot of their leaders have also advocated him, saying that he understands that the bottom line is that children get the best education possible for them in their neighborhood. So what is that going to look like? Hopefully, he continues the school choice effort. Not saying fully privatizing education, but that people have options. Can I go to a school that teaches about my heritage? Can I go to a school that teaches and honors me, that the people look like me? Is that such a bad thing, whether it's publicly or privately funded? That is what is necessary to help people get the most out of their education, a community-based education that helps me uplift myself and my community. That is what is necessary. So we would like to continue to see school choice because we see what the public school has done to us. Not that I haven't gone to a public school or many other people haven't been successful, but if we look at it as a whole, it has not had very successful outcomes for us. And last but not least, reversing decisions from the last administration. So this comes with a lot of civil rights baggage in the form of transgender students. Are they allowed to use which bathroom they want to? Also, are they allowed to play on sports teams that they choose of or that they identify with as far as their gender is concerned? We should request that he reverse the decisions saying that student discipline practices cannot be used in determining if a school is being fair to its students or not. You have to look at the discipline practices because we know that students of African descent are disciplined 2 to 3 times more harsher than students who commit the same offense but are from the majority background. So we want to reverse those back, okay? Right now, those guidances are gone. Also, taking into consideration race when looking at school integration plans. That has also been reversed by the last administration. We want to get that reversed, okay? We need to look at the race. We need to understand who is going where in order to identify if things are integrated, are fair or not. So these are things that had been reversed by the previous administration that we want put back, Mr. Miguel Cardona. So these are the 5 demands that Black families should have for our new Secretary of Education coming up. And as a quick recap, number 1, school reopenings. We are okay with holding off for a second, especially if it includes mandatory vaccinations, new mandatory vaccinations. Number 2, standardized tests. We want another waiver, at least another waiver. We would like to see them canceled altogether like the ACT and the SAT has been almost, but standardized testing is not really beneficial for our group, so we want to see them canceled again. Number 3, what is school going to look like when it starts back up? This reimagined school. Are you going to have more support for those students who have experienced emotional trauma and isolation, depression, anxiety? We see that Biden does want to double the number of school psychologists and counselors in schools, so we'll see if Miguel Cardona can also respect that. So what does our schools of tomorrow look like? Number 4, school choice. We definitely want to keep school choice popping. We want to have an option to go to an African-centered school if we want to a charter school down the street or the public school. Or maybe we want to just do homeschooling. Maybe we have a schooling pod that we want to do. We just want options. We don't want our education dictated to us. We want to be able to teach our communities like we understand they know how to learn. And last but not least, reverse some of those decisions back, specifically the ones that deal with disciplinary practices for students of African descent. We have to look at those numbers to make sure that schools are not suspending or putting students out of the classroom where they can't benefit from the education that we are saying that they so desperately need. What's the point of going back to school or schools reopening if they're just going to be suspended, or if they're just going to be in the corner, or they're just going to be in timeout? These are things we have to look at, and these are the demands that we need to place on this new Secretary of Education. Things that can directly affect us in the near and the long term. Well, I hope this has been an informative discussion. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, we would love to hear from you, your opinion on all of this. And if you have any suggestions for demands that should be placed on this new Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona. So once again, this has been Breakfast with Baba. You might say, where's your breakfast? Hopefully you got yours because I got my biscuit. Technically it's brunch with Baba, but that's okay. We hope to see you all soon. Remember, you've been watching Barbican 2, Jedi Learning, where anyone can learn to learn. Peace. Oh, before I go, Merry Kwanzaa, Habari Gani, Umoja, unity.